This is Celeste, and this is the Celestial Report. And today it is my great honor to have Jon Wedger with us, and we're going to be talking about trafficking and ritual sexual abuse. It's an uncomfortable topic, but Jon comes to us all the way from the UK to bring us some insights, and he is a former, or was a former copper, which is, you might also know as a Bobby. So welcome, Jon.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So how did you, you're going along your career path, and how did this particular topic interest you? And then you went and you're a strong advocate for people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a retired Metropolitan Police detective. My career sort of ended quite abruptly, not in the sort of manner I'd have liked. But anyway, it was just a path I went on. I became a specialist in investigating child sexual abuse and specialist interview skills. And, working in the remit of child abuse investigations wasn't a place I wanted to go. I always wanted to be a detective. It was an honor to serve in the Metropolitan Police. I mean, looking back, I was proud to do it, but now, it left a bad taste in my mouth because of what I went through. And I'll explain exactly how that came about. But at no point did I ever want to investigate anything to do with children. I had a fantastic career. It was going without incident. I started off in quite a rough part of southeast London, which is the more impoverished part of London. Police officers in the United Kingdom all start off in uniform, and they have to do 2 years what they call on the beat. So you're basically just walking around the area, or sometimes you're privileged to go in a car. It's very old-fashioned how we police in the UK. We're an unarmed police force. All we used to have was what they used to call the truncheon, which was a 9-inch piece of solid wood, and that was the only protection we had. No stab vest, no bulletproof vest, nothing. London's a capital city, and it's a city in Europe with a high crime rate, and it's got a high murder rate as well. I think at the moment it's running the highest out of all the European cities for murder. Back then, we basically used to fight. That was our way of dealing with stuff. It was quite an old-fashioned way of dealing with things, but it seemed to work. I didn't know any colleagues that ended up getting shot or anything like that. As time went on, I did know colleagues that got stabbed, and beaten in fights. I got injured quite a few times in fist fights in the police. So, but my career was going good. I wanted to go into the detective branch, and I went from southeast London to the west end of London, the centre of London, where I started training as a detective. It was very good, I loved it. Then I managed to get onto the oldest police force in the world, which is the Marine Police of London. And it's the River Police. It was where policing began, on the River Thames. And that's why when you're, it's all based on maritime law. It's very ancient. That's why when you're in a court, you stand in the dock in the UK, because it's like the docks as in water. And even the beat, walking the beat, come from the beat of the rowing of the boats when they used to row. And it come from the beat. So it's steeped in history. I served 4 years, I think, a few years there. And whilst I was there, I was asked to look into paedophiles in the United Kingdom in 1997. They brought in the sex offenders register, where sex offenders had to sign on a register, and they would then be monitored and evaluated as to their risk to the public. And so a lot of these sex offenders were going missing, and they didn't know where they were going. So I was given the task of looking for them, hunting them down. And my remit was London's got an extensive waterways network. So we've got canal, we've got phenomenal canal system in the UK. And near enough every town and city is connected by a hand-built, waterway, a canal. And these go back to the 1700s. These are hundreds of years old, these things. But they're no longer used for industry. Now they're used for residents and for, people's spare time, leisure industry. But people live on boats. They've got a thing called narrow boats. They're canal boats, but they're quite substantial, really, when you go, and they look very slender and long. But when you go inside, they're quite spacious things. And the sex offenders were going to live on these boats, and it avoided them having to subscribe to the provisions of the Sex Offenders Act. They could move about. But it was a double-edged sword, really, for the police, because they sort of said to me, "We believe there's 2 living on canal boats in London. If you can find 2 more in a couple of months, we'll be happy." Well, in the first month, I found 90, and they range from people that had been convicted or cautioned, as we have in the UK, which is like given an official warning for like child pornography, downloading it, from the internet, right the way through to conspiracy to mutilate children. Very dangerous individuals. But the canal network is also a lure for children. So a lot of children would be drawn to boats and for fishing, and they were always in when you go out the cities, they're in rural areas where the police sometimes couldn't access it because, there's no roads there that go through fields and woodland and things like that. So if a child ended up in the hands of a paedophile on a boat, there's not a lot anyone could really do to try and locate them. So I highlighted this massive problem, and I managed to get the law changed in the UK. It was quite a monumental thing I did, and they were the intelligence part of policing was shocked at how many sex offenders they were, and it gave me the first time an insight into the mind of a paedophile. We're dealing with very, very calculated, devious individuals. And when you start to profile these people, they don't go by the normal definition of a criminal. A lot of criminal will have like a chronology of offending, starting usually from when they're young, and it will increase in severity as they get older. But sex offenders tend not to have that, tend to keep under the radar. They're very deceptive people, and they're very manipulative people. And so I started really getting an insight then into geographical profiling, sex offender profiling, and realised there's a lot of merit in this sort of policing. And the UK is very far behind with it. Well, officially, it's very far behind. I know that our intelligence services have always used it, and I was to find out that there are certain units within the police that also use it. So what happened then was that I found 90 sex offenders, going right the way up to ones that were actually conspiring to abduct vulnerable children and mutilate them and rape them. And it was absolutely appalling. But names started coming out. So I'm just going to turn the engine off for a minute, because names started to appear on my intelligence files, and they were names of people that had some sort of prominence and position within British society, whether it be politicians or people high up in industry or even in the police. And this didn't go down too well. So the rug was pulled under my feet, and they shut down. Really was 18 months of hard work, and the intelligence that I gathered is still being used to this day. It was incredible amount of hard work went into it, and I virtually profiled most of the people living on boats in the UK. And I was told that it was because they couldn't afford the funding for the operation, and it was only when I pushed a senior officer, because I said, I don't believe it. This is highly successful. There's no need for me to be taken off it. And he admitted, look, it's come from high up. You've got to back down. But at the same time, I was working with officers from various intelligence departments, and again, it opened my eyes to how much intelligence gathering there is on any society's citizens. It's quite alarming. But for this was for a good reason. But they didn't tend to do much with the intelligence. They had it. And I was told by one officer that was involved in gathering intelligence on paedophiles. And he said, what you must understand, John, is that whenever you do work in the police and you're very good at it, you get praised and promoted. I went, yeah, well, that makes sense. He said, however, when you deal with sex offenders and you're very successful, like you've been, he said, the opposite occurs. They shut you down. And he went on to tell me about numerous politicians and actors that had cropped up on inquiries. One was a Home Secretary, which was one down from Prime Minister, who was involved in raping young boys. And he said each time they had information on this Home Secretary, then the intelligence services shut down the police operations. And he said, you know, you've got to be careful, John. You know, your name's now coming to notice. And after we had that conversation, of course, the next day I was removed from my post. So I was offered pretty much any job I wanted in the police, you know, for someone of my rank. And again, I never, ever went out my way to work with kids, because I was a single parent at that time of 4 children. So I had a very busy work life, but my home life was flat out. It was incredibly hard for me. I was a man in my late 20s and I had 4 children to look after, and one was an infant. I mean, I look back now and I don't know how I even survived, you know, and a dog. So I didn't want to be dealing with other people's children. I had enough on my plate with my children. But like I say, when I give my talks, the children found me, you know. And I realised for the first time in my career that dealing with sex abuse of children, you actually do make a difference. You know, most sort of law enforcement jobs, you never you are reinventing the wheel. You never really make a difference. You're just treading over old ground, you know. But when you deal with paedophilia and stamping it out, you make people's lives better, you know. And I was to find out that 80% of the prison population in the United Kingdom had come from child trauma. So it seemed to be that sex offending against children was really the key to any dysfunctional society, you know. If you want to ruin a society, then abuse the children. And if the children don't get any counselling or help, it's going to leave a long-term mental scar on there, you know. And it's like anything, any wound, because it is a wound, you know, it's a mental and an emotional and a spiritual wound. If you don't look after it, that's going to turn into an abscess. And, you know, and then this is why we get very dangerous criminals in society, you know. And there is a shocking statistic about the amount of, it's a very controversial topic that those that have been abused go on to abuse. Not all of them, no way, by far all of them, but a percentage in that community of survivors that go on to abuse is so much higher than from society that hasn't, you know. And so I got a job with Vice, the Vice unit. So Scotland Yard had a Vice unit, and that was dealing with prostitution, gambling, all sorts of things, you know. And I was working with street prostitution, and I was out there on the street, just really arresting the street prostitutes. And prostitution in the United Kingdom is illegal. There's drives to make it legal, but you know that you can split prostitution in two. The street scene and the brothels are two different things. Girls that work in brothels, it's a chosen career, you know. They choose to go in there, you know. We get a lot about human trafficking and all that. Yes, it does go on, but on the whole, people in there, they've gone in under their own volition, and they do it because it's tax-free money and it's easy money, you know. The girls that work on the street, they're doing it under duress because they're heroin and crack cocaine addicts. That's how they've got to pay for it. They sell their bodies to pay for their drugs. And I actually had sympathy for the girls that worked on the street. I had no sympathy for the ones in the brothel, because they weren't paying their taxes and they chose to do it. So when they say this argument that if you legalise prostitution, you take it off the street. No, you don't. You can't have girls from the street, crack addicts, heroin addicts, girls that most of them had many contagions. They had tuberculosis, contagious tuberculosis, hepatitis C, HIV. A lot of them had mental health problems. And one thing they all had in common, they were all sexually abused as children, every one of them. And you will also see this with heroin addiction. Heroin is an analgesic. It is a painkiller. You take heroin to ease pain. Pain isn't physical all the time. Emotional pain, Yeah. So a lot of them took it because it took away the pain. It took away the memories. And when you actually got to know these people, actually got the time, because what I would do is I would recruit the street prostitutes as my informants, and they got extra money for it, and they'd give money on drug dealers, but more importantly, they'd give money on clients that wanted young girls, very young underage girls. And also some of them would tell, some of the clients would tell the girls, that they've had sex with young girls and things like that, and they would pass that information on to me. And I got to sort of know them, and when you hear their life stories, it's heartbreaking, really. And the one thing that policing has taught me, it's taken away my judgment. With a lot of police officers, they become snobs. They're very judgmental. They look down. They're arrogant. They're conceited, and they look down on people. But it had the opposite with me, because I ended up working so closely with those that were on drugs, class A drugs, those that were just hanging on to life because of illness, all coming from child abuse. And a lot of the time I worked on my own, and I was totally, unarmed. There was a couple of occasions when my life was in danger, and, I nearly lost my life through stabbing. Luckily, I managed to, punch the bloke, quicker than he could stab me. But a lot of the time, I just relied on my personality, and I've become quite a very benevolent individual as time's gone on, and a very understanding person, because any one of those girls on the street, that could have been one of my children, if life had gone wrong. So that's
a question for you. So would you further divide the prostitutes into older children? And
yeah. Well,
what is the youngest child prostitute you saw?
Yeah, I'll get on to the children, because child prostitution, when they're putting together policing plans, and you hear them all the time, and I've actually I'm educating the British government. I've been asked, I've given evidence at an independent inquiry held at the House of Parliament, sponsored by the Houses of Parliament, and it was to look in the failings of how this has been allowed to go on, child prostitution. And I've now been asked as an advisor to them. And with child prostitution, you need a 100% proactive approach. It will never find you, because it's an underbelly, right? Paedophilia on the whole is still the last taboo. We're living in a society now where you've got all the different gender pronouns and everything else, and that's becoming very acceptable. It wasn't that long ago it was illegal in the United Kingdom to be a homosexual. Even into the 1980s, homosexuals couldn't join the emergency services. That they couldn't join the armed forces. It was banned. You got thrown out of the armed forces if they found out it was homosexual. How things have changed in a very short period of time. now we have the transgender agenda, you know, whatever way you want to look on that. But there is an inference that is going towards the sexualization of children. However, society still sees it as taboo. And there's not one society on this planet that allows it. I know that people do say that the Quran makes references to young children and all that. It's still illegal. The age of consent is different, you know, that varies, but not by much. Not by much. It does fluctuate up and down, but not by much. And it's only as countries become westernized and you know that it does raise up. But whereas over here now we're lowering the age of consent. I think the age of consent should be 21 myself, without sounding prudish. I really do. I think that, you know, what is the need, you know, the rush to sexualize children. There's just no point. It's just nothing more than a perverse agenda. So, you know, if you went on the street, you wouldn't find child prostitution, but if you know where to look, it's there. So one night I'm on vice patrol and I see this girl appear. And the streets we would patrol were usually in quite impoverished areas. And there was usually a park or an industrial estate where the girls could take their clients, you know, usually in cars, some were on foot. And I saw a little girl and I watched her and she was loitering for the purpose of prostitution. So I went over and I grabbed her, but I took her into the car as a victim and not as a perpetrator of crime. I saw her as a victim. She was 14 years old and she was on crack, cocaine and heroin. And she had numerous ailments because of her lifestyle, you know. I'm surprised if she's even alive today, you know. And one of the things she had was scabies. Now, scabies is a mite, and it's contagious. It jumps from person to person. It goes into clothes, it goes into material and everything. So I told my supervisor that I'm going to be off the road. We've got a young girl in. We're going to take her and away to a special room that we had in the police station where we get something to eat, give her a warm drink, and we'd get the Child Protective Services down, the social services, to come and we're going to put a care order over this girl because she was under care order anyway, but they're not interested. Once these girls leave at night, they, you know, the care homes have got no power to stop them, and to be honest, they're not bothered anyway. If the girl's out for 2 or 3 days, that's 2 or 3 days without this girl causing trouble, you know. And so she was, you know, whoring herself, for better use of the word, 14 years old. So I put her in the car, and then I get a call back from a supervisor: get rid of her, throw her out, just throw her out in the street. I went, why? He said, well, she's got scabies. She's going to give it to you. She's going to give it in the car. The car's going to need to be cleaned, deep cleansed. And if you take her back to the police station, we'll have to do the whole thing to the room, this little juvenile room that we had for the girls. And they said, no, you just throw her out, just throw her out. So that was the attitude that the policing had. I kept the girl. And okay, I'm not going to break that circle just like that, but it was an insight, you know, and she wasn't alone. There was many other girls, as I was to find out, but I was just appalled at that was the official party line. So I then get information about a young girl that was working the streets who's in a care home. So I go and see this girl. I go and visit her, and she'd made allegations that she's being used as a prostitute. So I went and saw her and said, you know, is it true? Because they said to me, what's the point going there? She's just a liar. These girls all lie. Anyway, she said, no, it's true. You know, it's not just me. There's others. She was 15. And I said, how long have you been doing it? She said, 3 years. So from the age of 12, she was very little for her age anyway. So when she was 12, you know, she showed me pictures. I managed to get them later from her grandparents. And when she was 12, I mean, she looked like she was 9. And she was now coming off of heroin and crack cocaine as well. And she told me who was pimping her out, how much she was being sold for, you know, where she would go, and the other girls involved. So she gave me other girls. I went and met with the other girls, same story. and it went on and on and on. The youngest girl we had was 9 years old. 9 years old. And everything was the same. And it was all run by one prostitute who the police knew about. And I was shocked to find out that there was intelligence that this girl was actually working young girls. Sorry, are you still with me? Sorry, someone rang me there, so I just had to cut the line off.
You're here.
So we started. There was two of us just working on it as a proper police operation for child prostitution, and we realised that information had been received for nearly 2 decades that this had been going on, but it had never been acted on. But we put it together and we started making arrests. And we were gathering intelligence like they'd never got before. We was really moving forward. And we started getting information about executives within the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. We started getting information about senior police officers that were involved, a judge, a local magistrate was involved, the venues they went to. So the girls could go from a very upmarket, what we call the West End of London, a very, very affluent part of London. They could be traded in they used to be taken to very, very wealthy, opulent Arab restaurants, Lebanese restaurants, and traded there for £2,000 a time. Or they could be another night, they could be taken to a crack house in a ghetto area and they would be swapped around for 10 rocks of crack cocaine, just passed around. So clientele went from drug dealers, all the way up to wealthy Arabs. But what was important was that we started profiling the people that were having sex with these girls. And it sort of changed the attitude that people had to what a paedophile was. I mean, we had, trendy Jamaican guys in their 30s having sex with young girls. Wealthy Arabs, doing the same. Other women were sometimes used with them as well. And it was a woman that was actually running the whole thing. And she was also sexually assaulting these girls. So it totally changed my perception of what a paedophile was and the police's perception as well. Because it was usually a middle-aged white man with big, thick glasses who lives with his mother and he's a bit odd. And it wasn't at all. It was across the board. Now, because there was information relating to people high in society, I decided that we need to record everything. So I come up with a rule that no matter what, we record it and we put it onto the intelligence system on the computer. And the two girls as well, we were a bit worried about it. And I said, no, just do it. We've got to do it. The world needs to know what's going on. And, because these girls, it could stop at any time. So we put everything on and I put it all in my name. And then as soon as I did it, the report was deleted. And I thought, well, how can it be deleted? It got a unique reference number. So I put in the unique reference number for it, for this intelligence report, and it was a blank screen. Someone had deleted it. So I had a copy of it. So I typed it again and I put it on. But what I did was I made sure that I stayed very late and put it on the last thing in the night. So the early intelligence officer, he will get it as opposed to whoever's deleted it now. So that's exactly what happened. And it remained on the system. I was then dragged before a guy who is now probably the most senior police officer in the United Kingdom. And he turned around and he said, look, you don't understand, Jon, you don't understand. You can't go doing this. And I said, but why? And he said, because this goes too deep. And he said, if you mention a word of what you know outside this room, you're going to lose your home, your children and your job. You've got to shut your mouth. He said, no one can help you if you carry on doing what you're doing. And I went, why? He said, you just don't understand how deep this goes. He said, you're going to be thrown to the wolves. He said, and I can't protect you. I didn't understand what he said because I was naive. What he was telling me was that this is an elite paedophile ring and it's a very established elite paedophile ring. And the unit is there, in my opinion, to be gatekeepers to this, to make sure this information never gets out. And I've only been proved right that, you know, and I say to everyone who does anything to do with paedophilia, you'll only ever be proved right, because whatever they cover up, it's going to get out. And we've seen it with the Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, our Prince Andrew. We had it with a guy called Jimmy Savile, who was an entertainer in the United Kingdom and a massive paedophile. Not only was he a child rapist, he was involved in the occult, Satanism, and there's rumours he was a necrophiliac. He was having sex with dead bodies, and he was caught in mortuaries and all sorts of things. And then when you look deeper, a government inquiry came out because after Jimmy Savile died, this information came out. Now, the intelligence about Jimmy Savile was out there for decades and decades and decades, since the 1950s, the late 1950s. Information come in that this man was raping children. His victims went into the hundreds, way into the hundreds, you know, and that's who come forward. And a lot of these children, they don't come forward because they're frightened, or they end up on the street. No one will believe them. We had a big problem in the United Kingdom post-war, from the Victorian time. It got worse post-war, and then up till the sort of 1980s, where we had lots of children's homes. Kids were put into care homes, and they were systemically abused, ritualistically abused, and organised abuse on there. The evidence has come out that organised criminals are involved, the government departments are involved, the intelligence services are involved. This is all factual information. And when we look at even our Prime Minister in the 1970s, a bloke called Mr. Ted Heath, he took England into the United Kingdom, into Europe. There's an investigation that went on, led by a very, very brave Chief Constable in the southwest of England. Our police forces, we don't have a federal police force. They're done by county regions. It's all the same law, but there'll be different bylaws, right? But they'll all be independently run, you know, but they'll all come under the guidance of Her Majesty's Constabularies, which is the Queen ultimately, you know. Apart from the City of London Police, and the City of London has got nothing to do with the United Kingdom. The Queen's got no jurisdiction. It's a very bizarre entity altogether, but on the whole, they all go under the same thing. And this Chief Constable for a county called Wiltshire, where Ted Heath actually lived, he set up an operation looking into Ted Heath's activities when he was alive. It was a posthumous investigation, and I think he said there would have been 33 prosecutions for rape had he been alive. And he also said that Ted Heath, you know, wasn't just an abuser, he was a rapist of children. There were allegations that he'd killed children, and this Chief Constable said that they had information that Ted Heath was a Satanist. The Chief Constable, I know the guy now, he was threatened the same as I was. We saw other police officers coming forward, all detectives, you know. One was in the islands, the Channel Islands. The UK has got lots of overseas territories, mainly islands all around the world, and they're just mini England, you know. If you go there, they've got one place called Gibraltar, which is in Spain. It's actually British sovereign territory, and it's more British than Britain is. It's incredible. It's got the bobbies on the beat there. And the UK's got these places all around the world, and there's been horrific cases of long-term systemic organised child abuse on these islands, and whoever's uncovered it is imprisoned or they're thrown off the islands. There was a guy, senior officer, was sent from a Scottish force out to Jersey in the Channel Islands, which are just off the northwest coast of France. Beautiful islands, tax havens, and there was allegations children in the care home were not just being abused, but they were being murdered for satanic rituals. And it was dismissed by the local government, covered up by the police. This guy went there as independent investigation, and they actually found human bone They put cadaver dogs in there. They had anthropologists and archaeologists. They identified skull, other bone fragments. There was information in this basement that kids were taken there, put in a bath, electrocuted. They were hung up. They were tortured. They were butchered. They were dismembered, and there was blood. He found the bath. He found handcuffs. He found blood on the walls, and he found bone, which tied in with the accounts of the kids who survived it. And the British government shut it down. They said the bone would be analysed. The anthropologists identified it as a between a 7 and a 10-year-old child, human child, and the cadaver dog identified it, infallible evidence, as human. If you get more than one cadaver dog and they identify it, then it's 100% it is human. Because sometimes they will pick up animal scents, but if 2 dogs do it, and it is human, and that's that. And it come back once the British government got hands on it that it was coconut shell. We had another police officer. She did the same, grooming gangs, girls being pimped out, very similar to what I dealt with. And it all came out at the same time because Jimmy Savile made me feel strong and coming forward. I found in one day, I found 10 children. I found 3 children in 10 minutes that were being worked as prostitutes. By the end of 1 week, I found 50. And bear in mind, this is from a police force who said categorically there is no problem with child prostitution. So in 1 week, I found 50 children that were working as prostitutes, that the system knew about. Not that no one knew about, the system knew that they were working as prostitutes, and I had the evidence to prove it. So how many more don't we know about? 80% of all trafficking of children for sexual abuse goes on within the home. And a child who's been sexually abused is 6 times more likely to be used for crime later on in their life, So I was threatened. They threatened to take my children off me. They threatened to sack me, and for some reason take my home off me. I didn't really get that at the time, but I was frightened, and I kept my mouth shut for a little while. And then the main witness in the case, she was found dead, an unexplained death, and she was dumped in the street, and her body had been injected with an opiate, a strong, hit of an opiate. And that really changed me, that did, because she was a brave girl. So I decided to make allegations of corruption against the police for what they'd covered up. And there was then a 4-year campaign by the police to silence me. There was 9 attempts to imprison me. My bank account was shut down. They stopped paying me for 3 years. I had no income for 3 years. I was almost on a weekly basis. I was arrested for a different offence. All rubbish, It ranged from data protection violations, because as police officers we have access to a huge amount of. Just going to start me engine up. It might make a little bit of a background noise. Sorry, that'll go in a minute. A huge amount of intelligence, and how we disseminate that and use that is a matter of opinion, But I was told by one of the other officers who'd whistleblown that they will use it against you. They will use the data protection. That's how they start, and that's what they do with every single whistleblower. They say, right, you've mismanaged intelligence. So they did that to me on numerous occasions. They arrested me for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, heroin, an absolute load of nonsense. I'll tell you the story, but it's just laughable. It's a joke. I got also discipline served on me for talking to the press, for working a second job. Well, I had to work a second job because I had no income. I had the bank come round to try and seize my house because I couldn't pay the bills. I couldn't access my money because they'd shut my bank account. Another thing they did to another whistleblower. They shut his bank account down. All for what? Because all of us were exposing, people having sex with children, organised sexual abuse of children. And if police officers can't protect children, well, what use are they? I even wrote, as a Catholic, I wrote to the Catholic Church and saying, come on, please help me. And they backed away. They wouldn't do anything. So I fought the police, and in the end, I won, and I managed to secure my retirement. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? I've come all this way and I've learned so much. So I started using my policing skills, and I started going and visiting victims of sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse. And I started interviewing them, putting their stories out, and just sheer injustice. I mean, there's a massive failure on all levels, with the social services, with the family. It all starts with the family. Always starts with the family. So, one of the things I talk about now is strong family values. We must love and look after our kids, not hurt them. And it's when the family breaks down, it makes our children vulnerable. And we've got this incredibly wretched culture. And it's not just in the UK. They'll have it in most of the Western world, really. And it's this baby father, baby mother culture, where the girls will just get pregnant and the blokes just run off. And then they'll get pregnant by someone else and he'll run off. And you'll have women with kids with all different fathers, and men with children all over the place. And, it's rife within the Afro-Caribbean community. Again, I'm not denigrating any. I'm not. It's not, let's deal with facts. I don't care, Celeste. I don't care if I upset or insult an adult. I've not been put on this earth to placate adults. God put me on this earth to protect children, and that's what I've done. And I think I've done a very good job of it, So I started then being asked to go and interview criminals, but not just petty thieves, hardened, organised gangsters, people who had done time for murder, serious crimes, armed robbery. And I was welcomed with open arms. One of them, he was one of the UK's most notorious gangland criminals and enforcers. He's become like my best friend. We speak to each other on a weekly basis, and all we do is pray. Both committed Christians now. And I started putting their testimonies out. They'd all come from abuse. Everyone had come from abuse. And it got bigger and bigger. And then something started happening. People started coming to me. And an ex-criminal said, John, you need to talk about this other side of sexual abuse. And I said, what? He said, satanic ritual abuse. He said, have you heard of it? And I went, well, yeah, I have, because I did deal with cases of it in the police, in child protection, but not what we know as sort of Satanism in the UK, which is very much seen as a middle to upper class white devil worship, as really sort of shown by that film Eyes Wide Shut. The elite, the wealthy, that meet in a big manor house and have orgies and then kill people. It goes on. Oh, without a doubt, it goes on. What I dealt with in the police was a lot of witchcraft from the African communities, voodoo, Santeria, Opia, which comes from Jamaica. It's a version of voodoo that the Jamaicans have, whatever they formulated, whereas Santeria is more Cuba and South America, and so I sort of dealt with that. I dealt with a lot of witchcraft from the Congolese communities, the Nigerian communities. So I had dealt with it, but it was never really taken seriously, and it wasn't never really sort of catalogued, intelligence-wise. It's been its own separate entity. It was just seen as an aggravating factor to what really is just child neglect and abuse. But it wasn't. It was very, very organised and very, very dangerous. And there was a torso of a young boy washed up from the River Thames, shores of the River Thames, and it was just been mutilated. The head had been off and the limbs were off. They didn't know what it was. There was rumours it could be witchcraft. Knowing what I know now, that whenever there's dismemberment, especially beheading, that is Satanism. End of. But the UK just doesn't recognise it. So I started to speak with people who had been ritualistically abused, and the victims of satanic ritual abuse were different to any other victim I dealt with. And the main difference being that they had a thing called DID. And DID is dissociated identity disorder. So I'm just going to turn my engine off again. And I'll get my finger out of the way, sorry. I've just got to move this. Sorry, I was meant to be in an office today, but my shift's got changed, so I'm not in the office tonight. So I've lost my office. That's why I'm in the car. Now DID, there's a film called Split, which sort of highlights DID, and what you know, it used to be called multiple personality, and it's almost really all from victims of satanic ritual abuse. And the reason that they're different is that when a child is sexually abused by an adult, whatever the adult says, whether it's that they're a victim of themselves, or they were weak, or there was duress because they're in the satanic cult or coven or whatever, it's only an excuse, because they have a choice. They choose to sexually abuse and to rape that child. No matter what they say, to be honest, I'm not interested. They chose to do it to that child. They can say what they want to the court in mitigation, and if they want to then come and work with us as investigators and give information on people worse than themselves, yeah, we'll listen. But there's no way we're listening to them as victims of anything, whilst there's child victims out there that they created. You know, they put right what they've done wrong before. But this is a problem with paedophiles. They're very dangerous at how they manipulate, and you've got to be very, very careful what you say to a paedophile, because they'll turn it. So the more information you give them, the more open doors you're giving them. You must keep all your doors shut. You know, it's them that need to open their doors, so we know what goes on in their mind. And only should they get any sanction or help once they help put right what they've done wrong to that child, you know, to a degree, because they're never gonna mend them wounds. But at least justice goes a long way in healing. So kids that are born, because a lot of Satanism is intergenerational. They're born into these families. The women tend to have a leading role when it comes to the abuse. And one thing I've learned is that when women sexually abuse children, they do it with a viciousness that men can't muster. Their abuse of a child is incredibly calculated and incredibly spiteful compared to that of a man. Men abuse on a more prevalent scale, but when a woman is involved, it really is horrible. It's horrible anyway, but it's got a spite to it that men don't have. And that torture, these children are tortured. The reason they torture them is, firstly, they enjoy watching children get tortured, like people who enjoy animals in pain. They like it. They get turned on by it. It's a power thing. But also when they torture someone, it brings about silence. And you see this exampled a lot with domestic violence, when women are brutalized by the men and then have this blind faith, you know, like a dog has to its owner, even though it's kicked and starved. So it's a very, very strange thing. But they will drown the children. What they can do with drowning, the child will die, will suffocate, the lungs will fill up, but they can be revived. So quite a lot of these paedophiles in Satanism are very good at first aid, because they revive them. And also they like having sex with a child while it's being strangled, because the body constricts, constricts. It goes into that sort of death rattle, and that turns them on as well. So strangulation, electric shock, isolation, burying them. They will bury them with insects, make them eat slugs, snails, the most worst things, freeze them, keep them in the freezing cold, all to the point of near death, and then bring them back. Whippings, beatings, inserting things into the anus. It's just appalling. A lot of the victims have got damage to their back because, you know, they've had things inserted in their anus. A lot of the victims can't keep down normal jobs because two reasons. One is that anyone who has control, like a boss, supervisor, manager, that's abuse as far as a victim is concerned. They see authority as a threat, so they can't be told what to do. So you'll get people that have been abused will be anti-authority, very anti-authority, and they might be classed as being uncontrollable or antisocial, but it's not. They're wary of authority. But there's another level that I found out in the police when I would interview victims of continued sexual abuse, mainly the boys, the victims of sodomization, is that if they got a job, they would shit their pants because their sphincter will be damaged. Because a young boy's body isn't meant, or a young girl's anus isn't meant to have a grown man's penis rammed into it, at the very least. And it damages it, and it damages their bowels. Some of them have had ruptured bowels where the penis has actually ruptured through the large intestine, and no healing. No, you know, one guy told me that his bowels were ruptured because they'd raped him, and they'd got a dog to rape him, a little kid of 8 years old, and he lied there dying, and one of the care home workers said, do not go to hospital. If you go to hospital, you'll get treated even worse, and then they'll think you've informed on them and they'll kill you. So he had to say nothing in extreme agony with a ruptured bowel. So they defecate themselves, because when you see pornography, it is one of the things that is going to destroy society on its own right. It's ruining our children. And a lot of pornography, what would be classed as straight pornography, is now like concentrating on anal sex, girls doing group gang banging anally and all this sort of stuff. Young girl, they don't understand these idiots, that not only are they damaging those who watch this, but also those that choose to do it. I'm not on about those that are coerced into it, obviously, but the sphincter muscle and the anus isn't like a vagina. A vagina is like a fist. It's like a wall of muscle, and it's designed to expand and it's designed to contract. Only 2 generations ago, women were having 20 babies. It wasn't uncommon, especially in Catholic countries such as Ireland. It was quite a common thing. Now people don't so much, but the anus isn't. It's like a chain. It's like a ring of little chains all linked together, and when they're opened out beyond what they should be, them little chains break and they rupture. So aesthetically, it might look like it's closed, but it's not closed at all, and it won't do its job, which is to keep waste matter in and keep gaseous matter in as well. So people that have been damaged in this way, they may well smell. And a guy said to me, you'll find a lot of gay men will over-scent themselves. He said, you ever go and arrest a gay man in the morning, they'll smell a bit different, because those that are long-term in it, because they're damaged, and it's right, you know. So they would do this to the kids. Women, the girls, if they were vaginally raped, would have misaligned wombs. So a lot of them had problems with birth because their wombs are damaged. The torture prevents them from speaking out, right? So it's mind control, and the Nazis really fine-tuned this with the MK Ultra program during the war. You know, that if you do this to someone, then you have got their tongue for life. So they're trained not to talk, and when you talk to a survivor of abuse, they're like they're reaching, like they're going to be sick. They want to tell you, but they can't. Their body won't let them tell because they've endured such horrors. And on top of that, they will have a multitude of personalities that will occupy their mind space. And each personality is there to protect a child. So they will all have childhood names. They'll have names like Sparky, because Sparky is electricity. So when I get electrocuted, Sparky comes. So actually, Sparky will take the pain. So me, Jon Wedger, won't feel the pain of electricity. Sparky will take that. There'll be another one that might deal with bruising, like Bluey, because it was the blue bruises. So when I'm being beaten, Bluey will come and take the pain. So this is when you get people that can take incredible amounts of pain because they're multipled, right? You can't take pain. You naturally need pain because otherwise you get hurt. You hold on to a hot iron, you know, and your multiple personalities, you'll hold on to it because Bernie will take away the pain, but Jon Wedger can't, and it will damage. So you need pain. We do, you know, and but these people haven't got that, and sometimes they're reluctant to take these multiple characters away because they will then feel pain, and also it's emotional pain. So people can't hurt them, and they can go for a relationship, and someone will you know, run away from them or leave them, whatever, and they'll just carry on because the emotional pain can be dealt with. A character will take that. But the problem is when you're dealing with Satanism, you're dealing with spiritual warfare, right? It says in the Bible, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, the realms of darkness. So the Satanist job, the active Satanist job, is to put demons into a body, give a demon a home. They're disembodied spirits. They have no home. They need to incarnate in someone. They need to be in a living being. And the younger, the better, you know, and that's how Satan works. And Satan's demons, you know, the demons answer to Satan. They only answer to Satan. They don't answer to anyone else. They're loyal to Satan. And those that do the devil's work, they're there to put these demons in, and they'll do that through raping, you know. They'll do that through incantations and everything else. So the survivors, the childhood survivors of abuse, will be used in rituals. They will be used to murder a child. They'll be given a knife to cut a baby open. One woman told me how they sellotaped or heavy duty taped, gaffer taped a letter opener, the long stiletto type knife, to her hand. She was 6 years old, and there was 5 babies, girls, and she was made to insert this repeatedly into the vagina of each baby, screaming babies. And then she was made to eat human feces. They urinated on her, and then 2 teenage girls were brought in, rubbed her with the blood of the children, and then held her down while the high priest raped them. So you've got people like Aleister Crowley, that proclaimed Satanist, Anton LaVey. They all try, and even this Aquino that you had that was high up in the military in the US, and you know, Ozzy Osbourne, you know, claiming that he's not a Satanist, he's not this. Oh, come on now. He wrote a song, Mr. Crowley. And let's look at what these people do. They rape children. They murder children. When they take a body, it always has to be a blood sacrifice, right? The devil demands blood, and everything is an attack on Jesus Christ. I've yet to hear an account when it's an attack on Allah or on Buddha or on ascended masters. I myself, I'm not a Catholic anymore. I'm a friend of Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian. I walked away from Catholicism. I was appalled by Catholicism, and especially when I saw the name of my cardinal on a list of active Satanists, you know, and that was it. Everything that the devil does is an attack, an abomination against Christ. Children are the gift from God, so they have to violate the children. And blood has to be spilt. So whether that's from an animal or whatever, but what value has an animal got? It's a minor level ritual. The higher up you go, it's going to demand human sacrifice. Now they get homeless people in, and they'll sacrifice a homeless person. Again, you go to a street prostitute, she's not going to be clean, spiritually or otherwise. And also, there could be a lot of health risks with diseased blood. that you get from them. They'll use them to get them pregnant to produce a child, but you get a child, and they'll either abduct a child, they use their own children, or they're bred for that purpose. Children that are intergenerational or kept alive, because a lot of effort goes into training them through the mind control, through the torture, through the sexual rituals and everything else. But those that are born in it or those abducted, they die. They will die. And I just started getting account after account after account coming and coming and coming and coming. I interviewed many survivors with DID. It's very precarious because unless they're resolved, and the only ones I met that have been resolved are the ones that have gone through therapy and a process of deliverance at the same time. Because from what I've learned, and again, I might upset people that aren't, into the Christianity, and I get it, because part of their abuse is ritualistic abuse. So they'll be taken to churches. See, in the UK, we're an ancient sort of race, and a lot of our churches in the Middle Ages, what the Normans built in the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries and all this, were just built on pagan ritual grounds. And they used the stones, even the altars, from the pagan ritual grounds. So whenever you get a church in a village on a hill, there's a good chance it's come from a pagan thing. And some still have pagan relics, under the altar. So for all intents and purposes, these are pagan sites just revisited. And they're just going under the name of the Protestant church or the Anglican church or whatever. But they still got huge significance to the Satanists, and they're used. And prayers will be put on them. So if you want someone to sort of go for deliverance and do that through prayer for a Christian group, they're going to run, because they'll see it as another ritual. And things will be done to them as well to stop them ever going to Jesus. So one girl, she was telling that they would get her in a ritual, get a baby lamb, and they'd just cut it open, slit it open while it was alive, and it'd be screaming, this lamb. And they say that's the Lamb of God. That's Jesus, the Lamb of God. So whenever the words Jesus is mentioned, she just remembers a mutilated baby lamb screaming. And they will say the Lord's Prayer as well while they're doing it. So in their mind, you can't ever get them where they need to go, and that's for deliverance away from it. So, these are very, very spiteful people. A list came out in 2000, and it's called the RAINS list. It's an acronym, RAINS. You can Google it, RAINS list, satanic list, and it's a list compiled by a very well-respected psychotherapist and doctor of psychiatry in the UK who worked with mental patients, and she started dealing with people, survivors of abuse, and what she started getting was what I got, people with DID, and no one really knew much about it. They say they were schizophrenic or whatever. There was that film Sybil many years ago about multiple personality, and again, it was never really associated in popular culture with being from Satanism, although those in the know. They've done a good job at keeping this from us for a very, very long time. And if two or more people independently who didn't know each other mentioned a name, she put it on the list, and it is a list of all the actors, politicians, even my old boss in the police is on there. That was on the Vice unit. He's on there, which will explain a lot. And it's a shocking. You can Google it. It's a real shocking list. It's well worth looking at. And the other thing that started happening was the sort of interest from the intelligence services that they started taking in me, when I started doing this work. And so I was contacted, and it was quite a nice conversation, to be honest, but I gained a lot of popularity in the United Kingdom. I become quite well known. Millions of people knew who I was and what I was doing. And I could become very influential. And a well-known activist in the United Kingdom who started getting very politicized sort of wanted to link in with me. And the intelligence services told me, back away. You're entering a different remit altogether. And it's quite ironic because our intelligence services, they're the MI departments, and MI stands for military intelligence. We have MI5 and MI6. People think of James Bond as being an MI6 agent. One's homeland, one is British sovereign soil, the other is abroad. And military intelligence, they come into play where civilian police leave off, is when anything becomes influential. So if you become politically influential and you can cause instability politically, they jump in. Also, if there's a health risk, so if you in any way plan to contaminate the water system, for example, or agricultural thing, they will jump in. So if you're going to cause a financial detriment, a health detriment, or a political detriment, these people jump in, and they class me as potentially becoming a political detriment. But the head of the military intelligence back in the 1990s was a man called Sir Peter Hayman, close friend of Margaret Thatcher. He was a convicted paedophile. We had Ted Heath, which, was a Satanist and a child molester, and may well have been a child murderer. There's a lot of allegations about child murder around him, who was, just before Sir Peter Hayman was in charge of military intelligence, he was a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. We've had each parliamentarian, each member of parliament, each politician in this country has a PA, which is a political advisor, not a personal assistant, a political advisor. And they advise them, on all the sort of aspects of law and protocol and everything. A bit like in our judicial system, a judge will have a clerk who will advise them accordingly. We've had the last consecutive 5 prime ministers, their PAs have either been investigated for or convicted of paedophilia. I mean, I can go on and on. That's an hour-long talk that I can give about the political influence, of paedophilia. And then we also look at the children's homes, how they were trafficking children to the New World. We've got a charity. It had to change its name. It's now called Barnardo's. It used to be called Dr. Barnardo's. And Dr. Barnardo was seen as this anthropologist and this lover of humanity. And he built these big children's homes all over, and everyone thought he's a saint. The man was the biggest exporter of children to Canada. These children, up until the 1970s, were getting sent to Canada from the age of 4 to 14 years old, and most of them went into slavery and servitude and sexual abuse. And then kids were sent to Australia, again into sexual abuse. They were just taken out of the children's homes and they were sold. So they wasn't just gone, they were sold. They were auctioned. And Dr. Bernardo was auctioning these children, and they were sent into servitude in Canada, into hardship, hard labor. And again, Canada, some parts get some perishing winters. We get rotten rubbish weather in the UK, but we don't get perishing winters. We just don't get any sun, and we get lots of wind and lots of rain. But and these are little kids from the age of 4, and all they want to do is be tucked in at night. And this was done with a thumbs up from the British government. So this is what I do now. I just campaign, and I campaign on many levels, and I get attacked by Satanists all the time. But if you upset a Satanist, you're doing a good job. You're doing a good job, and you're doing God's work. God's had enough of this, and Jesus warns us. Someone said to me the other day about Jesus, and he said, he teaches people to turn the other cheek because they thought I was a bit aggressive. I said, listen, when Jesus went into the temple, the moneylenders, aka the bankers of today, not only did he turn them tables over, he went and got a whip that he made out of rope. He knotted the rope. He actually made the effort to knot the rope. This wasn't instant arming where you look around for something to pick up to hit with. He premeditated this. He got rope. He made it into a whip. He knotted it, and then he soaked it in water for maximum punishment. So when he went in there, he kicked their asses and he whipped them. That ain't turning the other cheek. And in the book of Matthew, there's a warning to any paedophile out there by Jesus himself that you take one of the little ones into sin, which means rape them, you might as well put a millstone round your neck and throw yourself in a lake. So he's telling them, kill yourself, because if I catch you, you die. You know, you die. So when people say, would you advocate, the death penalty? Well, Jesus did. Jesus said, kill it. They need to die. They rape children. They should die. That's it. Finished. That's it. End of. So, in doing God's work, I'm not advocating murder in any way. But what I'm saying is children should be number one priority. And anyone who hurts children, we should be throwing every resource we can, to get justice for that child, and to get help for that child, and to get counselling for that child, and to make that child a better citizen and to feel safe again. But what we find with the criminal justice system in the UK, and I no doubt it's the same around the world, is that emphasis on children and child abuse is bottom of the pile.
Yeah.
Bottom of the pile. We have a national society for the protection of cruelty to children, a national, right? We have a royal society for the protection of birds, for the protection of fish, for the protection of whales, for the protection of dogs, cats, badgers. That's royal assent. But when it comes to children, bottom of the pile, bottom of the pile. So it's one of them things, and people have asked me about, would I advise anyone to whistleblow like I did? And I'd have to say no. But when you've got a moral compass, you don't listen to advice. You do what your heart tells you and what God tells you, and advice never comes into it, because it's suicide. I mean, I'm lucky I got through it. And I would do it again, because it's the right thing to do. But you will get hurt on every level, and you will sacrifice everything that is dear to you. And there's a lot more I won't go into, that I haven't gone into. But the police weren't going to stop until they saw me swinging from a bit of rope. And it's a war of attrition, and they're an enemy that won't tire. And when they are, they're replaced by someone else who won't tire. And then on the other side is just me, and I do get tired, and I'm not match fit, and I haven't got the money to see it through, or to repair myself, but they have, and they keep going until you're crushed. But you must speak out, because what they're doing is wrong, and it will be exposed. It will.
It will. And, you're just so courageous, and you're pouring yourself out like Jesus poured himself out. So I just want to encourage you. What can, we've got lots of people listening and watching. What can they do to help your foundation in the UK, and what can they do in their local communities? Because we have people around the world listening.
Yeah. I mean, I did have, I set up a foundation, but it got attacked, so I got, I would raise money. I would pay for people to go into alcohol and drug rehab. I gave money into charities that prevented child prostitution. Money was going to stop knife crime, kids stabbing each other, because it's all a byproduct of it. But at the same time, the Satanists didn't want me doing what I was doing. So I was reported to the tax office, the fraud office, the police many times, whatever they can come up with, broadcasting standards, oh my word. So it's a difficult one. I'll give my email. People can contact me direct, what we're doing now. If they want to donate, brilliant. That's good if you want to. The money, I'm very careful what I put out there, where it goes to, because if I put a charity name, that charity gets contacted by the Satanists and all that. But what we do is we do surveillance. We do surveillance on ritualistic sites. We're going up there this weekend to one. We visit victims and survivors. I've been doing statements recently. We're doing a challenge to serious crime investigation. We're being a viable alternative. We needed some money desperately a month ago, because we needed to put a cadaver dog, or a group of cadaver dogs, onto a bit of land where 2 children are buried. And unfortunately, we never got the funding. And I won't do public funding anymore because it just gets attacked and it's stopped, which is horrible. It's really bad. So the money goes to forensic teams such as cadaver dogs, ground penetrating radar, surveillance equipment. We've got a really capable team of ex-forces guys. So what I'm gonna, the second part of the question, what can you do? So the first part, I will leave my email address if anyone wants to contact me, and however they want to help. Brilliant, great, that'd be lovely. If you know, especially if there is someone that wants to fund, donate, or whatever, I assure you that money will go do God's work. And you know, but I can't give you
That's
receipts
fine.
and everything else. So it just
In this
it,
ministry, we understand you
yeah,
have a
yeah.
calling and you cannot give the details, and that's
We
fine.
can't, and I've done that before, and I can't. I opened my doors too wide last time, and I got infiltrated, and it was shocking. Now, on an individual basis, I want to give a call out to victims and survivors and say it's not your guilt to hold. You've done nothing wrong. Don't be frightened. They're the ones that are frightened, right? There was a thing called satanic panic years ago, where they thought the public were just panicking for no reason over Satanism. So they tried to rubbish the efforts of survivors and people trying to expose it. There is a satanic panic, and it's the Satanists that are panicking because they know what they've done. So whether they've done it worshipping their deity, they've raped a child, they've sexually abused a child, they've mutilated a child, end of. Even if the governments do not want to see it as a separate indictable offence, right? A separate indictment that is like racially aggravated, you know, or homophobic aggravated assaults or whatever that they have now. They put an annex onto it. If they don't want to do that, that a child was raped satanically or murdered satanically, it's, you know, it still doesn't matter. You know, you still get life for raping a child. You still get life for murdering a child. So if it's got Satanism attached to it, does it really matter? No, as long as they get banged up and they never get access to children. So I say to victims, the person who did it to you isn't a monster. It was a human being. Monsters can't be tried. Human beings can, right? And you'll find that whoever did it to you when you was a child, they're old now, right? They're not the big, frightening ogre you thought they were. They're sick, twisted, sad people. That's what they are. Anyone who sexually abuses a child is inadequate, and I can't make relationships with adults. That's why I have to pick on children, right? They're weak. You're the strong ones. You stand up, you stand proud. You're the strong ones. It ain't your guilt. Give that guilt away. Give it to God. Tell Jesus, he'll take it off your back. And give the authorities the names of the sex offenders. You know, give it to them. And do you know what? Even if it doesn't come to a conviction, every day that person stands in a court, stands in the dock of a court, thinking in their head that they're going to prison for life, even if they get not guilty, you've made their life a misery. And so you should, you know, make their lives a misery because they deserve it, you know. And I would say to the community, take an interest. We are seeing it in the UK. We saw 3 of them in the last 3 months of partners, of parents, new partners. And the last 2 were both women, both lesbians that killed their partner's children. One was a little boy of 6, one was a little girl of 16 months, tortured them to death. Right? People would have seen that kid with bruises on its face, you know, walking funny because it's in pain. They would have heard the shouting, the screaming, the kid crying. Call the police, make it your problem. You know it's wrong. If they were doing it to a dog, you'd be the first one on the call to the animal rescue. Just because it's children, people lose their courage. Oh, it's not our problem, not our problem. Make it your problem. See them as your children. And I want to do a call out to all my brothers and sisters over there that may be in a position to stand up and defend these little ones, the ex-forces guys, the ex-police officers, you know, the ex-firemen, firewomen, the ex-nurses. Get together, form a conglomerate of individuals and start doing the jobs yourself, especially you ex-veterans. What war could be better to fight than that for the safety and protection of children? And you can do it. You don't have to go abroad to do it. You do it here. And I call out to them, be a viable alternative. The government aren't going to investigate this. If the police departments aren't, if the local authorities aren't, then you do it. You've got the experiences. Where do they come from? Where are the judges, the barristers, the detectives? Are all people. And if they've retired, you've got them skills. Bring them forward. We're seeing it in the UK now with paedophile hunter groups, vigilante groups, who are going out there and catching these mainly men that are grooming children online on social media to meet up with them to have sex with children, grown men doing it, and they're catching them. They're decoying them. They're not adjunct provocateuring them. They're doing it within the provisions of our justice system, because these people are doing it anyway. So all they're doing is becoming a decoy, making out they're a little child, but they're not. They're a grown adult, and they're talking to another grown adult, and they entrap them and they get them, and they're getting conviction after conviction after conviction. Well, what's stopping us doing it further? And I call out to victims of satanic ritual abuse, speak out, because if we don't get your information, this carries on. How has Satanism been allowed to go on as long as it has, and they've never been caught out? No one has caught it on camera. Your phones have got it. They've got the best recording. iPhones record better now than some studio equipment. If you know there's a ritual, go and get a remote camera and stick it on there. A motion sensor camera. Entrap all them people in your coven. Do it. Do it. They've only got strength if you give it to them. Stop giving these people power and take it back. And if the police don't do it, let's shame these police departments. If for whatever reason they cover up, let's shame them. We got a guy in the UK now that's doing this, exactly that, a fellow called Tommy Robinson. And we'll give a big up to this guy. There's grooming gangs, predominantly Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs that have been getting young girls, teenage girls, very young, lower than the age of consent girls, and pimping them out for sex. And the police have covered it up because they don't want to get caught up in being branded as racist and targeting an ethnic group. And in the meantime, these poor little children are being passed around like sweeties, raped, and there's nothing that's being done. And anyone who speaks out against it, they're getting prosecuted. And this guy's had enough. So he's gone and basically investigated himself, and he filmed it all. And he's going to be doing a big expose on the 29th of this month in a town called Telford, and exposing the police, the politicians, and these Muslim grooming gangs to what they're doing. So do that, but record it. There's cameras everywhere. You park where you shouldn't, you'll get a ticket. You go through a red light, you get a ticket. So how can they be raping, murdering, mutilating children and no one catches anything? It's beyond belief. So now's the time to turn around and say no, because look, we're all going to die. Not one of us is coming off this planet alive. And whether you want to believe in it or not, you're going to face a judgment for what you've done. I want to go to my grave knowing I did everything I could to protect children and to make it better for the next lot, knowing that my position on this earth wasn't one for wealth, opulence, perversion, or whatever, was one for benevolence and protection and education, and I've done my job. So
you've done it brilliantly. John, are you up for a few questions?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, John, the other John, do we have questions?
Yeah, we do have a couple of questions here, and we maybe get a few more once we start asking these. But the first question, John, is the person is asking, are there post-rescue aftercare facilities in the UK to help rehabilitate those who come out of SRA?
They're few and far between. There's therapists, and again, they've all got to make a living. There's therapists that specialise in DID. That I know a couple of them. They do a tremendous job. There's certain art therapy groups, Because one thing with a survivor of SRA is that they're programmed not to talk, but they can't program them not to draw. So one of the ways information gets out is through artwork, through drawing. And, there's some fantastic bits of artwork. We're going to see an artist on Saturday who's got her own gallery, and so much is explained through the artwork. But unfortunately, there's nothing government sponsored. I mean, we've now just struck a deal with a guy who runs a private alcohol and drug rehab centre, in which we can turn someone around in 2 weeks from even a heroin addiction. But again, that costs money. I'm trying to get a few £1,000s together. There's a girl who's a survivor of satanic abuse. Managed to encourage her to report it to the police. I always say report it to the police first, and if they do nothing, then we'll see what we can do. But the police must always be given the right, the opportunity to do nothing. But since she's come forward and she went to report it, she got triggered and she went straight out and back onto heroin. She's come forward now, so we're trying to get some money together to get her through a 2-week drug rehab centre, which is followed by counselling, and also that there's the opportunity that she might get housed through it as well. But it's all independent and it all costs money. And again, there is no guarantee of a relapse either.
Okay. Now there's another question here, John. This questioner asks, are you getting support from the Christian church to rescue SRA victims and to help with aftercare?
No. There is one on nothing. When I say no, when it comes to like the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, no, absolutely not, nothing. When it comes to these like house churches and these little Christian groups, yes, unbelievably so. They've been mainly through prayer and through small monetary donations, but mainly through prayer. I'm with a church at the moment, and it is prayer, but we need it. We need the armor of God, and we need the prayer coming through. So, but when it comes to the big institutional churches, not at all, nothing.
John, if a person wanted to give you money to help you along with that, how would they do that? What's the practical way they would do that?
Well, just email me, and from there I can arrange for Swift codes and things like that to be exchanged. Okay. And what I will say is that I'll give you assurances that the money will go to a multitude of things. One will be to equipping our team of mainly ex-military guys. Also the logistical costs of getting places, but the main one we want to look at the moment is getting this woman through a 2-week drug and alcohol rehab, so we can get her clean, and then we can start getting some information off her, because she's fresh out of satanic ritual abuse.
Okay, thank you for everything you've shared today. That is all the actual questions. There is a comment here. Somebody makes a comment, which I'll read it, John, in case you want to add anything to it. This person's commenting about Masonic child ritual sex abuse with Masonic leaders. I don't know whether you want to make any comment about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was attacked by one Freemasonic lodge, which has got a predominantly police membership. They're saying, John, because I said something about Freemason, I've never really denigrated them as such, but what I've said is there shouldn't be an oath within an oath. So you shouldn't, if you've made an oath within the police, why are you making an allegiance to a Masonic order? And I mean, I'm against Masonry because I think it's evil. I think has got its roots in Satanism, although it's a very veiled thing, and it's a multi-layered sort of beast indeed. And I think a lot of them don't realise what they're getting involved with. I worked a lot with Masonries, Masons, especially in the police. It was heavily Masonic, And I think most of them don't realise what they're involved in. They think they're just involved in an ancient benevolent society, which might give them a leg up in the business front. But I have heard of rituals being conducted in Masonic arenas, in Masonic temples, more than one occasions, mainly in the US, although I have heard of one case over here in a county called Buckinghamshire where a woman said she was taken to a Masonic temple for a sexual abuse sort of ritual. But again, it's one of them things, it can't really be answered in a yes or a no. There's just so much to it. What I would say is most of the Masons that I've known, I've worked with, I don't think they're bad people because I don't think they fully understand what they're doing. However, there are those that are fully aware of what they're doing, and they're the ones that really need to be held accountable, and they have got a big influence, especially in the police. So that it's not for me, and I'm very wary of them, and I think they may have caused me, although I'll never prove it, a lot of detriment, through my process of whistleblowing.
Thank you for your courage, John. I really appreciate it. And that is that is all the questions I have here just at the moment. So thank you.
No worries.
Yes.
God bless.
Thank you, John, and God bless you. And you'll be hearing from us soon. I just really want to thank you for your courage and spending time with us and educating us on this topic.
Well, I'll just call out my email address.
Okay.
The email, so it's John spelt Jon. So it's Jon Wedger Foundation. So it's JONWEDGER Foundation, all in one word, at gmail.com. Okay. And I've got the Jon Wedger YouTube channel, and we have a website as well, Jon Wedger Foundation. There's a website there as well with details on it.
Well, thank you so much. God bless you and protect you, and Godspeed in everything that you're doing for.
Thank you so much for having me on, Celeste. God bless you all. And my heart goes out to all victims and survivors. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.